Negative thinking is more than just a fleeting moment of doubt. It is a persistent force that seeps into every corner of your mind, quietly shaping the way you see yourself, the world, and your future. It starts subtly, often disguised as caution or being realistic, but over time, it becomes a lens through which you interpret every experience. A simple challenge is no longer a problem to solve. It becomes a threat. A small failure is no longer a lesson. It becomes proof that you are incapable. Negative thinking has a way of magnifying small obstacles into insurmountable walls, convincing you that the effort required to move forward is too great. This form of thinking is deceptive because it doesn't scream. It whispers. It tells you, you're not good enough. This is too hard, or you'll never succeed. And if you're not careful, those whispers grow louder, echoing in your mind until they dominate every thought. Decisions start being made from fear rather than from courage, and opportunities are passed by because the potential for failure seems too frightening. The weight of negativity is cumulative, building up day by day, and before you know it, it has shaped not just your mindset, but your behavior, your choices, and ultimately, your reality. What makes negative thinking so insidious is its ability to distort perception. It doesn't just make you feel bad in the moment. It changes the way you see yourself and the world around you. You begin to notice failures more than successes, threats more than possibilities, and limitations more than opportunities. Every setback is proof that you were right to doubt yourself. Every criticism confirms that you are inadequate. Every risk becomes unbearable because your mind has trained itself to focus on what could go wrong rather than what could go right. Negative thinking also drains energy in a way that is almost invisible. When your mind is constantly occupied with fear, doubt, or pessimism, it consumes the mental and emotional resources you would otherwise use to create, innovate, and act. You may feel tired, overwhelmed, or stuck, but the source isn't external, it's internal. Your own thoughts are working against you, shaping your emotions and decisions in subtle but powerful ways. Over time, this creates a cycle where inaction reinforces doubt, and doubt reinforces inaction, trapping you in a loop that is hard to escape. It affects relationships as well. When negativity dominates your mindset, it spills over into how you interact with others. You may become defensive, impatient, or judgmental, assuming the worst intentions or outcomes in every interaction. Opportunities for connection, collaboration, and mutual support are missed because your focus is on the potential for disappointment rather than possibility. People around you may sense the constant tension, the hesitation, or the skepticism, and it can subtly push them away, reinforcing the sense of isolation that often accompanies negative thinking. Even your own potential becomes clouded. Negative thinking limits imagination and creativity because it focuses attention on barriers rather than solutions. The mind becomes a place of constraint rather than exploration. What could have been a bold idea or a daring initiative is instead filtered through a lens of "it won't work" or "I'm not capable." As a result, potential opportunities for growth and achievement are overlooked, delayed, or abandoned entirely. The mind that should be your greatest ally becomes your most powerful adversary. The physical impact of negative thinking is real as well. Constant stress, anxiety, and rumination affect your body, disrupting sleep, increasing tension, and even lowering immune response. Your mind and body are intricately connected, and when the brain is occupied with persistent negativity, the body suffers too. Energy wanes, motivation drops, and the simple act of pursuing a goal becomes exhausting. Negative thinking is not just mental, it is physiological, affecting your well-being in every sense. One of the most dangerous aspects of negative thinking is that it often disguises itself as rational thought. You may tell yourself that you are simply being cautious, realistic, or responsible, but the truth is that the constant focus on what could go wrong prevents you from seeing what could go right. It convinces you that avoidance is safety, that doubt is wisdom, and that inaction is protection. This false sense of rationality makes it difficult to recognize the harm being done, which allows the cycle of negativity to continue unchallenged. Despite all its power, negative thinking is not an unchangeable trait. It is a pattern, a habit, and a choice in how you interpret and respond to experiences. It thrives on repetition and attention. Every time you dwell on doubts, fears, or worst-case scenarios, you strengthen the neural pathways that make those thoughts automatic. But every time you challenge a negative assumption, practice gratitude, or focus on possibilities, you begin to weaken those pathways and create new ones that foster resilience, hope, and clarity. Understanding the destructive nature of negative thinking is the first step toward reclaiming control. It is not something to ignore or accept as inevitable. Recognizing it allows you to see where it limits your actions, erodes confidence, and sabotages potential. Once you can identify the patterns and acknowledge their impact, you gain the ability to respond differently, to question assumptions, to challenge fear-driven thoughts, and to gradually replace negativity with constructive, empowering thinking. Awareness is the first step toward change, yet it is often the most overlooked. Most people live their lives on autopilot, letting thoughts and feelings dictate actions without ever pausing to examine them. They react to circumstances, to other people, and to their own inner dialogue without questioning whether these responses are serving them or holding them back. Negative thinking thrives in this environment of unawareness because it does not need permission. It only needs inattention. Until you consciously notice the thoughts that run your mind, you remain at the mercy of patterns that were never designed to serve your higher potential. The problem with unawareness is that it allows negative thinking to become normalized. When every challenge is met with doubt or every opportunity is filtered through fear, it begins to feel natural. People start believing that the constant self-criticism, the habit of expecting failure, or the tendency to focus on limitations is simply who they are. They confuse habitual thought patterns with reality, accepting the negative narrative as truth. This is dangerous because it disguises the real source of the problem, making it seem external rather than internal, something beyond control rather than something that can be addressed. Awareness is not just noticing negative thoughts, it is understanding their origin, their triggers, and their impact. It requires observing the moments when fear takes over, when doubt eclipses curiosity, and when hesitation replaces action. It involves asking questions like, why do I feel this way? And is this thought helping me or harming me? Without awareness, thoughts operate unconsciously, shaping emotions, decisions, and behaviors in ways that are difficult to reverse. When awareness enters, the first cracks appear in the seemingly impenetrable walls of negativity. Negative thinking often disguises itself with justification. People tell themselves that they are being realistic or prudent, masking fear as rationality. Without awareness, it is easy to accept these rationalizations as fact. But awareness allows you to step back and examine the underlying assumptions. It enables you to differentiate between cautious consideration and self-imposed limitation. With clarity, you begin to see how many of the boundaries you perceive are not imposed by reality, but by the habitual patterns of your mind. When you are aware, you also recognize the subtle ways negative thinking infiltrates everyday decisions. It is present in the choices you make about your career, relationships, and personal growth. It appears in moments of procrastination, indecision, or self-doubt. Awareness makes these patterns visible, shining a light on the mechanisms that were previously operating in the shadows. Once you see them, you are no longer a passive participant. You become an active observer capable of making intentional changes. Awareness extends beyond the individual mind to interactions with the world. When you notice how negative thinking shapes your perceptions of others, your communication, and your response to opportunities, you gain insight into the ripple effects of your mindset. Negative thoughts distort reality not only internally but externally, influencing how you engage with challenges, interpret feedback, and build relationships. Awareness is the lens through which you start to see these distortions clearly and begin to recalibrate your approach. Becoming aware also requires patience and honesty. It is not a one-time realization, but a continuous process of observation and reflection. Every thought, every emotional reaction, and every assumption is an opportunity to practice awareness. Some thoughts will be subtle, almost invisible, requiring careful attention to detect. Others will be loud and persistent, demanding confrontation. Awareness means refusing to turn away from these moments, choosing instead to explore the patterns and understand their effects. The power of awareness lies in its ability to create choice. Once you are aware of negative thinking, you no longer have to act on it automatically. You can pause before reacting, question the validity of the thought, and decide whether to entertain it or let it go. This pause creates space for alternative perspectives, for optimism, for courage. It is in these moments of conscious choice that the possibility for transformation emerges and the grip of negativity begins to loosen. Awareness also empowers self-compassion. By observing your thoughts without judgment, you begin to understand that negative thinking is a habit rather than a flaw. You recognize that it has been reinforced over time, often as a survival mechanism, and that it does not define your worth or potential. This understanding allows for patience and persistence, as you learn to replace old patterns with new, healthier habits without self-criticism. Finally, awareness is the foundation for every other step in overcoming negative thinking. Without it, efforts to change behavior, reframe thoughts, or pursue goals are inconsistent and superficial. Awareness gives clarity, insight, and perspective, providing the tools necessary to intervene in the thought process before it dictates your actions. It is the act of shining a light on the automatic pilot of your mind, revealing the influence of negativity and opening the door to intentional growth. Negative thoughts are not facts, and yet so often we treat them as if they are. From a young age, we are taught to trust our minds, to believe that what we think reflects reality. But the truth is that thoughts are often distorted interpretations of events, filtered through fear, past experiences, and unconscious biases. When negative thinking takes hold, it convinces us that our limitations, mistakes, and fears are permanent truths rather than temporary challenges or passing emotions. The mind has a way of taking a single instance of failure, a criticism, or an uncertain moment, and transforming it into a global judgment about who we are, what we can do, and what our future holds. These thoughts become habits, not because they are accurate, but because we repeat them over and over. The brain is wired to create pathways for frequently traveled patterns. Every time we dwell on a fear or replay a negative scenario, we strengthen the neural circuits that make those thoughts automatic. Over time, the habit of thinking negatively becomes so ingrained that it feels natural, even rational. This is why negative thinking is so powerful and so destructive. It convinces us that it is reality, when in fact it is simply a learned pattern that can be unlearned. The danger of treating negative thoughts as facts is that it limits our ability to act. If the mind insists that we are not capable, we begin to avoid challenges, shy away from opportunities, and settle for mediocrity. Every time we allow negative thinking to dictate our choices, we reinforce the false belief that the world is unsafe, that we are insufficient, and that success is unattainable. The habit of negative thinking, therefore, does not only harm our perception, it harms our potential, slowly constricting the possibilities we allow ourselves to explore. Negative thoughts are also selective in nature. They tend to focus on what could go wrong on our weaknesses and on imagined failures, while ignoring evidence of success, resilience, and growth. This selective attention creates a biased view of reality, skewing perception so heavily that the negative interpretation feels justified. Yet if we step back, we can see that these thoughts are incomplete. They are a narrow slice of reality, amplified and repeated to the point of dominance. Recognizing this imbalance is essential to separating fact from interpretation. The habit of thinking negatively also reinforces fear. Every time we act as though our negative thoughts are true, we train the mind to anticipate failure. This anticipation of failure becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, limiting risks, taking innovation and creativity. What could have been a bold decision, an exciting opportunity, or a learning experience becomes a source of anxiety and avoidance. By treating thoughts as immutable facts, we give them power over our actions, our emotions, and our trajectory. However, once we recognize that thoughts are habits, we gain the power to intervene. Habits are learned behaviors, and learned behaviors can be changed. Just as one can train a muscle to grow stronger, one can train the mind to focus on constructive, empowering thoughts rather than self-limiting beliefs. It is not a matter of forcing positivity or ignoring reality. It is a matter of consciously choosing which thoughts deserve attention and which are distortions that do not serve our well-being or growth. The process of changing these habits begins with observation. When a negative thought arises, pausing to question its validity is a powerful act. Ask whether this thought is based on evidence or assumption, whether it reflects reality or exaggeration. By challenging negative thinking, we create space to replace it with perspectives that are more balanced, more realistic, and more empowering. The mind cannot unlearn a habit without repetition, so consistent practice is necessary to rewire the pathways that once reinforced negativity. Another critical aspect is reframing. Negative thoughts often arise from the interpretation of events, rather than the events themselves. A single mistake is not a reflection of inadequacy, it is an opportunity to learn. A moment of doubt is not evidence of weakness, it is a signal to pause, reflect, and adjust. By consciously reframing experiences, we prevent negative thinking from taking root and from dictating our emotions and behavior. Reframing does not ignore challenges, it repositions them in a way that encourages growth rather than fear. It is also essential to recognize that negative thinking can be contagious. The internal dialogue we maintain shapes how we interact with the world, and the thoughts of others can influence our own. When surrounded by pessimism, criticism, or fear-driven thinking, the mind is more likely to adopt similar patterns. Awareness of this influence allows us to curate the inputs we allow relationships, media, and environments, to reinforce constructive thinking rather than perpetuate habitual negativity. Ultimately, understanding that negative thoughts are habits rather than facts is liberating. It removes the sense of inevitability and helplessness that often accompanies self-doubt. Once we internalize that thoughts are not truth, we gain the agency to interrupt, challenge, and replace them. This realization is not instantaneous, nor is it easy, but it marks the beginning of a profound shift, the shift from being a passive observer of our mind to becoming an active architect of our thinking, emotions, and potential. Shifting your mindset to focus on possibilities rather than limitations is one of the most powerful transformations you can make. Negative thinking narrows the lens through which you see the world, convincing you that obstacles are insurmountable and opportunities are few. The moment you choose to focus on what could be rather than what might go wrong, you create a new mental framework for approaching life. This shift does not ignore challenges or deny reality, but it redefines the relationship between fear, doubt, and action, allowing you to see solutions instead of barriers. Possibility thinking begins with curiosity. When faced with uncertainty or difficulty, the question changes from "why is this happening to me?" to "what can I learn from this?" or "what options do I have?" Curiosity turns problems into puzzles and obstacles into experiments. It invites exploration rather than avoidance, creating space for creative thinking and innovative solutions. Each time you approach a challenge with curiosity, you weaken the grip of negativity and strengthen the habit of seeing potential where others see only risk. Fear often disguises itself as caution, convincing us that it is safer to stay small or avoid action. Shifting your mindset requires recognizing that fear is not a stop sign. It is a signal that you are on the edge of growth. Every breakthrough in life occurs on the other side of discomfort. By reframing fear as information rather than judgment, you begin to take risks with intention rather than paralysis. You see that discomfort is not an enemy, but a guidepost pointing toward possibility and progress. Reframing requires attention to language. The words you use with yourself shape the mental maps through which you interpret reality. Phrases like "I can't," "it's impossible," or "I'll fail" reinforce limitations, while questions like "what if I could?" or "how might this work?" open doors to exploration. Language is a tool for shaping perception, and shifting your inner dialogue is one of the most effective ways to rewire thinking patterns from constraint to potential. Focusing on possibilities also means acknowledging strengths and resources that may have been overlooked. Negative thinking emphasizes deficits, weaknesses, and obstacles, but when you shift your attention to assets, skills, relationships, experiences, you create a foundation from which to act. Every small resource, every past success, becomes a building block for tackling current challenges. By valuing what you already possess, you create momentum and confidence that feeds further exploration of possibilities. Mindset is contagious. When you cultivate a focus on possibility, your energy influences those around you. Conversations become more constructive, collaborations more creative, and decisions more forward-looking. Just as negative thinking can spread and limit potential, possibility, focused thinking amplifies resilience, innovation, and courage in both yourself and others. The simple act of framing challenges as opportunities has ripple effects far beyond your personal mindset. Shifting mindset also requires patience and practice. Negative thinking has been reinforced over years or even decades, so it does not disappear overnight. Each day presents moments to observe your thoughts, challenge limiting beliefs, and consciously choose possibility-focused alternatives. Progress is gradual, but every small shift compounds, creating new neural pathways that make optimism, creativity, and courage more automatic over time. Visualization is a practical tool for possibility thinking. By imagining desired outcomes and potential paths to success, you train your mind to anticipate achievement rather than failure. Visualization does not guarantee results, but it prepares the mind to recognize opportunities and act decisively. It also reduces the paralyzing effect of fear by replacing mental rehearsal of worst-case scenarios with constructive exploration of potential successes. Shifting focus to possibility encourages proactive behavior. Instead of waiting for conditions to be perfect or for fear to dissipate, you learn to act despite uncertainty. Possibility thinking emphasizes "what can I do now?" instead of "what might go wrong." It transforms waiting into acting, hesitation into experimentation, and doubt into exploration. Each proactive step reinforces the mindset shift, demonstrating that limitations are not permanent and that opportunity exists even in challenging circumstances. The practice of possibility thinking ultimately changes the relationship between you and your environment. Instead of being at the mercy of circumstances, you begin to see yourself as a participant with agency. Challenges become invitations to grow, failures become lessons, and risks become opportunities to innovate. By consistently focusing on what could be rather than what might fail, you cultivate a mental landscape in which creativity, resilience, and achievement are not just possible. They become inevitable patterns of action and perception. Your environment shapes your thinking in ways that are often invisible but profoundly influential. The people you spend time with, the media you consume, and the spaces you occupy all send constant messages to your brain about what is possible and what is not. If your environment is filled with negativity, criticism, or fear-driven thinking, your mind begins to mirror those patterns. You start to notice problems more than solutions, limitations more than possibilities, and obstacles more than opportunities. The external world becomes a reflection of the internal negativity that has been reinforced by those influences. Relationships are particularly powerful in shaping mindset. When you surround yourself with individuals who doubt, criticize, or expect failure, it subtly erodes your confidence and ambition. Their perspectives seep into your subconscious, influencing decisions and perceptions without conscious awareness. Conversely, when you spend time with people who challenge you, support your growth, and encourage curiosity and courage, you begin to internalize those same attitudes. The influence of others is not just emotional. It literally rewires your brain to adopt constructive patterns over destructive ones. The media you consume also plays a critical role. Constant exposure to fear-driven headlines, negative commentary, or pessimistic narratives reinforces the habit of expecting the worst. Even entertainment that glorifies struggle without resolution, or that portrays failure as permanent, can subtly reinforce limiting beliefs. Awareness of these influences allows you to curate your inputs deliberately. Choosing content that inspires, educates, and challenges your thinking creates an environment that strengthens optimism and resilience. Physical spaces have an impact as well. Environments that are cluttered, chaotic, or uninspiring can amplify stress and negative thinking. Spaces that are clean, organized, and filled with elements that stimulate creativity and calmness encourage focus, clarity, and constructive thought. The external environment and internal mindset are deeply connected, and intentional design of your surroundings can reinforce positive mental habits while minimizing triggers for negativity. It is not enough to remove negative influences. It is equally important to actively seek positive ones. Mentors, peers, coaches, or thought leaders who model constructive thinking provide templates for how to approach challenges, setbacks, and opportunities. Their influence is not about imitation, but about providing reference points for what is possible. Exposure to different ways of thinking expands the mind's capacity to entertain new perspectives, solutions, and strategies. The environment also affects habits, which are the building blocks of thought patterns. If your surroundings make it easy to procrastinate, avoid challenges, or focus on limitations, the mind will naturally gravitate toward those behaviors. Conversely, environments that encourage action, accountability, and reflection reinforce constructive habits. By shaping the external conditions, you create a context in which positive mental patterns are more likely to thrive and negative patterns are more likely to weaken. Culture plays a subtle but pervasive role in mindset as well. Societal norms, workplace expectations, and community attitudes influence what is considered possible or acceptable. Negative cultural messages can limit ambition, suppress creativity, and normalize fear-driven thinking. By becoming aware of these cultural influences, you gain the ability to selectively absorb what empowers you and discard what constrains you. This discernment allows the mind to operate from a foundation of possibility rather than limitation. Technology is another environmental factor that cannot be ignored. Social media, constant notifications, and algorithm-driven content can amplify negative thinking by creating comparison, distraction, and fear of missing out. Awareness of these influences allows you to set boundaries and create intentional digital environments. By controlling inputs, you protect mental energy reinforce constructive thinking, and reduce exposure to unnecessary negativity. Intentionality is key. Creating an environment that supports positive thinking requires conscious decisions about the people, media, spaces, and cultural messages you allow into your life. It is not a one-time adjustment, but an ongoing practice of observation, evaluation, and modification. Each choice who you spend time with, what you read, how you arrange your space, contributes to the reinforcement of constructive mental habits. Finally, understanding the influence of environment empowers action. You begin to see that negative thinking is not only an internal challenge, but also an external one, shaped by forces that can be adjusted. By curating your environment with intention, you create conditions that naturally support optimism, resilience, and growth. Every element of your surroundings becomes a tool for reinforcing positive thought patterns and reducing the power of negativity in your life. Taking deliberate action is the bridge between thought and transformation. Awareness, mindset shifts, and positive environments are critical, but without action, they remain theoretical concepts. Negative thinking has a way of immobilizing people, convincing them that preparation, planning, or even perfect conditions are prerequisites for movement. The truth is that action does not require certainty, it requires commitment. Every step you take, no matter how small, challenges the patterns of negativity and reinforces the belief that you are capable of influencing your own life. Action begins with small, deliberate steps. You do not have to wait for monumental opportunities or perfect timing. Even a single choice to respond differently to a negative thought, to try a new approach, or to take a risk despite fear creates momentum. These small acts accumulate, rewiring your neural pathways and gradually replacing the automatic responses of self-doubt and hesitation with confidence and initiative. Action, repeated consistently, becomes the habit that sustains transformation. The key to deliberate action is intentionality. It is not about doing more for the sake of busyness, but about doing what matters with purpose. Every action should align with the values, goals, and possibilities you have identified through awareness and mindset shifts. When actions are aligned with intention, they generate results that reinforce positive thinking and diminish the influence of negativity. Conversely, aimless or reactive activity only strengthens patterns of fear and doubt. Taking action also requires embracing discomfort. Negative thinking often convinces us that uncertainty or difficulty is unbearable, but growth rarely occurs within the comfort zone. Each step taken despite fear, each risk embraced despite doubt, expands capacity and strengthens resilience. Discomfort is not a signal to stop. It is evidence that you are moving toward meaningful change, confronting limitations, and challenging habitual thought patterns. Consistency amplifies impact. One-time actions create temporary shifts, but sustained, deliberate effort builds lasting momentum. Daily choices, repeated intentionally, compound over time, creating significant transformation. Writing down goals, practicing positive self-talk, engaging in constructive dialogue, and seeking new experiences are all forms of action that reinforce the mind's capacity for possibility. Each repetition strengthens habits that counter negative thinking, gradually making optimism, courage, and initiative the default. Action also requires accountability. Negative thinking thrives in isolation, where doubts go unchallenged and fears are magnified. By sharing intentions, seeking mentorship, or participating in supportive communities, you create a system of checks and reinforcement that keeps action consistent. Accountability not only motivates but also provides perspective, helping you recognize progress that might otherwise be obscured by lingering negativity. Reflection is a critical component of deliberate action. Taking action without evaluating results or learning from outcomes limits growth. Every experience, whether successful or challenging, offers insight into patterns of thinking, behavior, and response. Reflection allows you to identify which actions are effective, which habits need adjustment, and how negative thinking attempted to influence decisions along the way. This feedback loop ensures that action becomes smarter, more aligned, and increasingly transformative over time. Action is empowering because it shifts identity. When you consistently act against negative thinking, you begin to see yourself not as someone limited by fear or doubt, but as someone capable of shaping circumstances, solving problems, and pursuing goals. Each action reinforces a sense of agency, strengthening the belief that your choices matter and that your potential is not defined by past failures or internalized negativity. Deliberate action also multiplies opportunity. Inaction allows possibilities to pass unnoticed. Action brings them into focus. Every step forward creates new connections, insights, and options. What begins as a small, intentional act often leads to unforeseen opportunities, expanding your capacity for growth and reinforcing the mindset that nothing is fixed and everything is possible. Finally, taking action transforms thought into reality. The patterns of negative thinking, the fears, the doubts, and the limitations all lose power in the face of deliberate, consistent movement. Action proves to the mind that it is not bound by assumptions, that it can achieve results despite uncertainty, and that potential is realized through doing rather than merely thinking. Every intentional act chips away at the grip of negativity, building confidence, resilience, and the momentum necessary to continue moving forward.